Nintendo is back! With the massive success of Pokemon Go, Nintendo is once again at the top of the gaming industry. But this is a surprise. No one seemed to expect Pokemon Go to take the world by storm. After all, the general consensus is that the game isn't very good from a mechanical standpoint, and it's prone to crashing. But this is how Nintendo does business now. Not by making great games, but by pandering to Generation X nostalgia to keep them afloat until they stumble into the next fad. And let's be honest here, Pokemon Go is a fad. It's novel, it's fun, it's getting people talking, and while I'm sure there will be Pokemon Go games for years to come, the mainstream is going to get bored of it sooner rather than later. This isn't me slamming the game, it's just the way it is. And if you doubt this, come back to me in a year. Hell, come back to me in 6 months' time and see if there's still headlines in the paper or large gatherings at public spaces. And no, the announcement of the inevitable sequel doesn't count. Maybe I'm wrong and the game will be played by the mainstream for years to come, but I doubt it. A friend of mine that's a big Pokemon Go fan, hi Core, even he doesn't think the game will survive the winter because who's going to go out in the snow and rain to catch a Pidgey? But as I said, this is kind of how Nintendo operates now. A kind of contradictory business model of refusing to change and trying to get ahead of any fad on the horizon. Nintendo's been making mistakes as far back as the N64. Nintendo had foresight back in the early days, but now they are slow and conservative. While sticking with cartridges or the Virtual Boy could be argued as being a good idea at the time, but these days we have the benefit of hindsight, others not so much. Their refusal to move into online or have consoles that are HD until they had no other choice speaks to Nintendo's technophobic attitude. At the same time, there have been times when Nintendo was at the cutting edge. While it didn't always work, stuff like the Virtual Boy or the Famicom Disk System were way ahead of their time, and while motion controls weren't new technology, Nintendo did take a risk by making it a core feature of the Wii instead of making it just some peripheral. Yet it can sometimes seem like Nintendo is just throwing gimmicks out there to see what sticks. It seems like Nintendo was caught off guard by the sudden mainstream popularity of the Wii, though Wii Mania was short-lived. The assumption that casuals would get into gaming proper once the Wii eased them into it turned out to be false, as casuals were only interested in playing Wii Sports and similar party games, while hardcore games for the Wii were often lacking, due in no small part to the controller being rubbish. While the pointing worked fine for me, playing the Wii at a friend's house was almost impossible as the pointer would jitterbur out the screen, like you were trying to play it in a tumble dryer during an earthquake. Not to mention how imprecise waggling the controller was, especially when a game wanted you to do something specific or do anything fast or precise. The Wii U tried to make lightning strike twice with a tablet controller, but Wii Mania had already passed, so the casuals didn't buy it, and hardcore gamers were unimpressed by Nintendo once again making an underpowered console with a gimmick controller and little third-party support. Amiibos were a success as Nintendo jumped onto the Skylanders bandwagon, but the Toys to Life genre didn't last. Amiibos were notoriously hard to find in certain places too, making some people question if this was deliberate artificial scarcity on Nintendo's part, while Nintendo continued throwing things at the wall in hoping anything would stick. Nintendo can afford to take these risks as they have an almost guaranteed income from pandering to nostalgic Generation X Nintendo fanboys. While I liked Mario Galaxy, I don't think I've played a Nintendo game since then. The reason is pretty simple. I'm done with playing what is essentially the same few games over and over again. There's no better example of this than Mario Kart. Those games have barely changed since the N64. Same power-ups, same mechanics, even the same balance issues. Hell, even half the tracks are ripped straight from the older games these days. Compare that to Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed. That game is amazing and fixes so many of the issues that I had with Mario Kart. To put it simply, the game feels more fair, and while you can still get screwed over on the last turn, it feels somewhat skill-based, whereas Mario Kart is about getting lucky with the power-ups and exploiting flaws in the game's design. This is how it's been for 20 years now. And that's with the so-called new games. How Nintendo have handled old games is even worse, with them re-releasing old games with no extras for about £5 a pop, whereas other companies would release classic game compilations with extras for about 20 quid. While Sony does offer a similar service, at least those games are tied to an account, not a specific piece of hardware. So you could play games on the Vita and on the PS3. Not so with Nintendo, but we're supposed to overlook all that because Nintendo. Which brings us back to Pokemon Go. Simply put, a poorly made little phone game that pandered to Generation X nostalgia, this time with Generation 1 Pokemon. And it became a smash hit that no one really saw coming, despite Nintendo fanboys claiming otherwise. So one final point before I close the video. Why has Nintendo not jumped on the VR bandwagon? Well, that could be what the NX is, but it's more likely that Nintendo isn't jumping on VR because it's high-end tech. It's not some cheap to implement fad. If VR takes off and sticks around, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo does what it did with online. Resist until the bitter end and then half-arse it when they have no other choice but to embrace it.